am membership chairman and on the board at the Stirling Road Library, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of the friends of the Stirling Road Library. And if there is anybody who is here for the first time or not a friend yet, please join us and look and see what we're doing at www.stirlingfriends.org. And also we do have a YouTube channel. So if you go on our newsletter, and you could go right to YouTube, which is great because as we record Shelly tonight and we recorded other of our programs, you could see it again, or if you know any of our friends who missed it, they could go right to the YouTube. So this is a relatively new addition. To me, I didn't realize we even had this, but we do, and it's great. So welcome everybody, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Shelly to you. He is somebody who took this a year for Shelly to come on board with us, and boy, oh boy, it was worth the wait because he is wonderful, and everybody in the Tri-County area knows him by name, and you can see why he is as wonderful as on knowing all about his foreign films as he is. And tonight's film, The Hunt, is very interesting, somewhat disturbing, and he will give us major insight into that. A few fast notes though about what is going on before Shelly gets on, which I forgot to say. For programming next Tuesday, the 1st, we have Emmanuel doing another music program. And then we have Batya doing Paris, discussing Notre Dame. On Monday, February 7th, we will do yoga every Wednesday at 11. And the New Yorker, for those of you who join us on that, at 7 o'clock every Thursday. Check out your newsletter, read it, and please join us on Zooms. And again, when you have to RSVP, do that in advance as well. So without any more from me, Shelly, it's all yours. Please, everybody mute yourself though. And I will just, one other thing, Shelly has a fabulous newsletter. I will put his link in the chat if you don't have it already. And if you don't get it or from the chat and you want to contact us, and we will get it to you. It's worth receiving. All right, Shelly, thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back. It's nice to see you. And tonight's film, which is I understand has caused a little bit of controversy because it is a very controversial film in its subject matter. The Hunt. It is from 2012. It was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film Oscar in 2013. In addition, it won a host of awards. It won 38 international awards out of 73 nominations. It was nominated for 73 awards around the world, won 38. Among them, it won Best Actor at the Cannes Film Festival. And it is directed by, his name is Thomas Vinterberg. And if you saw the Oscar winner from 2021, which was last year, which was Another Round, that was also his film. He was director of Another Round, which also starred Mads Mikkelsen, by the way, in another terrific performance. But he is one of Denmark's, as well as international cinema's, most prominent directors. His breakthrough feature film, if you want to look back into his history, was a film in 1998 called The Celebration. It was a Cannes Film Festival winner, and it went on to receive worldwide critical and audience acclaim. Also had a very interesting topic, sort of dealt with some of the same issues as this film, but within a family itself. And as well as The Hunt, his film, as I said, was nominated for Best Picture and won another round. He began working on The Hunt in 1999. Now, this is interesting. So it took him really 10 or 11 years to put together. He received a psychiatrist, actually approached him, a renowned child psychiatrist in Denmark, concerning false, invented, repressed memory and how thought can be a virus. He was writing an essay on it for a magazine, and he had a number of files on how people put together fake memories, and then they become a virus. And it led him to create this fictional story about the loss of innocence, the notion of the hunt on both a literal and metaphorical level, and how groupthink can tear a seemingly friendly community apart. This film is resonant in so many different ways. It's not just about the particular subject in the film when we think about it, but it's about when a lie spreads and how a community reacts to it in a negative way without substantiation. This particular one is set in a small Danish town, an isolated Danish town from the mainstream, and it takes place over a year's time, as you've seen. The opening introduces us to this village where a group of men who are acting out a ritual of some kind. It seems like a yearly ritual because the town, the onlookers, the teenagers, the adults are all coming down to egg them on. And they're all joking around, and then we hear them in the dark chanting. So it's a place where ritual plays, a part, a certain importance. And then we immediately cut to Lucas, who we learn was a former high school teacher. His son's school had closed when he's explaining it to Clara, and he's forced to teach a lower school while overcoming a nasty divorce and gain more custody of his teenage son, Marcus. And when we see him at first, he's playful. We see that the kids love him. He's attentive to a degree. I mean, even the head teacher has him tend when one of the boys has to go to the bathroom. He has Lucas take care of him. And we see how good Lucas is with these kids. And then we see him walking when he comes from the store. He sees Clara standing there, and he approaches her, and we learn that she's the daughter of his best friend, Theo. And she's sort of, she's a little kid. She won't step on the cracks when they walk down the street, typical little superstitious kid and everything else. And she loves Fanny, the dog. So we learn a lot right in that little exchange between him and Clara and what he's like. And in the scene, when Lucas and Theo are together in the next scene, is stealing the cake that his wife is baking out of the oven. And we're introduced, that's where we're introduced to, once again, I bring it up, the Chekhov gun, the eye twitch. If you remember, Theo says, I know when you're lying, your eye starts to twitch. And he says, no, it's not. And his eye is twitching, which comes back to us at the climactic point in the film. But it's the next day when Clara is exposed to the pornography by her brother and his friend that all hell will break loose. I mean, it's you see her reaction to it. It's as if she closes down for a minute. I mean, this kid's performance is terrific, by the way. But she seems to close down for a moment, and they run off stupidly, not realizing what they just did. And then she goes to school, and you see her. She starts to write that little love letter to Lucas, and she prepares that little heart, and she puts it into his pocket, into his coat pocket, and she sees him playing with the kids, and she runs in, and he pretends to be out cold, and she runs in and gives him that kiss, and it is off-putting. I mean, yes, from an audience point of view, it's off-putting. All of a sudden, she runs in, she grabs it. You know, it's like, where did this come from? You know, we have to think, especially judging from when we see her outside, when her parents are fighting. If you remember when he takes her to school that day, her parents are fighting, and he picks her up and takes her. But anyway, so she runs, and he says, then he calls her over. He immediately jumps on it, and he says to that little, you know, thing you put in my pocket, and that gift. And he says, you know, you should give that to one of the boys or give it to your mother. And she says, I don't know what you're talking about. Right away, she doesn't want to admit that she did it. And she also, you know, he tells her, and you shouldn't kiss anybody like that. That's a kiss for your mother and father, for your mommy and daddy. That's not a kiss for anybody else. You know, and she doesn't really acknowledge what he's saying. And what's interesting is we know from the get-go, you know, Winterberg takes that off the table. We know he's innocent. We know he's innocent from the very beginning, and it's purposeful, so as not to distance him from us, so that we're able to take this journey with him on his side. Because if he made it ambiguous, we would constantly be wondering, is he, isn't he? Is there something going on here that we don't know about? But we are immediately privy to the fact that he's innocent. And it's here that everything begins, right after, you know, he talks to her and tells her about the kiss, and he goes home, and he meets the Italian woman who he befriends during the course of the film. It's here that everything begins to unravel. This is where the witch hunt, this is where the true witch hunt begins, another hunt. We realize that this is a hunting society. When we see the men gather at night, we see them on a hunt at the beginning of the film. We see that this is a hunting society. Even Theo says to his wife, this is not a sport. Hunting is not a sport. When she claims you left your gun out, if you remember, when we first meet them, you left your gun out. You know, this is, you know, this for your sport. He says, this is not a sport. In other words, they take this very seriously. This is a ritual that these men belong to. It's almost going back to the primitive DNA. So now this witch hunt starts, and this investigator comes in, and the parents all unite to believe Clara when the head teacher, without any real substantiation, begins to spread the idea of what Lucas did, what she thinks Lucas did. And so therefore, and especially, I mean, what that investigator does, the way he leads her on. I mean, we're sitting there seething, you know, what are you doing? What are you doing? And we really don't know who he is. They don't establish him as a psychologist. They don't establish what his credentials are, but he's come from another school, and he's there, and he's investigating this, and boy, he stacked the deck, and leads her to wanting to admit to Lucas, and all the parents believe it, and it's all based. What happens is this group is basing everything. It's not based on rational thinking. There's no rational thinking going on. Nobody's saying, hey, stop, wait a minute. We really have to figure this out. They're rather basing it on assumption. A group basing a lie that we know is a lie on assumption. And now they begin to act on it. Marcus is informed. You know, we see how how everything gets peeled away from Marcus. He's informed at the store he shops in. Remember, they tell Marcus, they tell his son, your father's no longer welcome here. He's like looking at them incredulously. There's a rock thrown through their window at one point. And finally, you know, just to go through some of the details that leads up to the death of Fanny, the dog. You know, how angry could we get? You know, one of the rules in the film is you never kill the dog. And here he goes that far to show how far a group of people will go. And when we think about it, we know that people will kill when driven by a lie. They could be pushed to that point. Through all the hunting and the rituals, we're allowed to understand that these are all the kind of men, and it's mostly the men who subconsciously invest even their smallest actions with a suggestion of violence. There is a thread, there's an underlying thread. Theo, when he first confronts Lucas, how he holds him against the wall. Marcus, an innocent kid, walks into the Christmas party, and how the men attack him, literally attack him. A young kid. And it's terrible what goes on, that this threat of violence, especially, it's an isolated, insulated town. Especially his best friend Theo, as I said, unlike Lucas is much more introspective. He's quiet. He thinks before he acts for the most part. We don't see any violence in him until a point towards the end. And he projects a sense of wounded delicacy. Throughout the film, he projects that I've been wounded. These are my people. This is my family. This town is my family. And look what they're doing to me. He doesn't understand it. Every conceivable notion of doubt is erased by this town. They have no doubts he's guilty. The police arrest him, they question him, everybody else. And the only one who comes to his defense, interestingly enough, seems like the richest man in the town, Brune, who owns that big mansion where they hold the hunting lodge things and everything else. And he lives in this large place, and it comes when he informs Marcus, when Marcus comes to him for help, what are we doing here? And Brune says, it's interesting. They call him in. He says, it's interesting. They question all these kids and all these other children, and all these children seem to have a memory of Lucas taking them down to his basement, and the realization that Lucas has no basement. Marcus even says, what basement? There is no basement. And they invented this lie. This is the collective virus. This is the virus. And it makes us wonder what the investigator who was questioning the kids was feeding them. It was probably that same guy, and who knows what he was feeding them when he was questioning them. And Lucas, though, is insistent that he can put everything right. He wants to put everything right. After all, as I said, he's lived here all his life, and this is his community, his family. He's not ready. He doesn't want to pack it in and leave. He insists that he's innocent. And we know he's innocent. And finally, when he's pushed far enough, when he goes into the supermarket, they don't want to serve him. And the guy literally physically starts to push him out. He resists. And he gets beaten up. And he goes back in and he picks up his groceries. And as he walks out, who sees him? Theo and his wife in the car. And they're looking, he sees him all battered, broken. He's beginning to wonder, what's going on here in his own mind now. And then, finally, Lucas realizes there is one place he can go that they really can't throw him out of. It's the church. He dresses himself up and he walks into the church and he sits down in the front, and the children are performing, and he keeps looking back, and he looks back at Theo, and he faces him down. And he says, look at me. This is the Chekhov gun. Look me in the eye. What do you see? You see nothing. He looks him straight in the eye. And his wife is pushing him away, and Theo doesn't raise a hand, because Theo now is beginning to question. He's right. This is what I used on him. He's beginning, he just looks forlornly away. It becomes, when he goes back home and they're having their Christmas party and Theo is standing there smoking that cigarette, he's got that look of doubt in his mind of how could I have not believed him? And Clara now gives the confession. She thinks she sees Fanny the dog. She thinks she sees Lucas. She's in a half dream state. But then when her father says, no, it's Dad, it's Daddy, she says, I'm really sorry for what I did. She admits that she made up a story, that she made it all up. And it's that point that he realizes, and he picks up the food and he goes to Lucas, in a sense, without saying it, asking for forgiveness. It's that very real moment, and Lucas looks at him and has to make a decision, and we black out. And as it blacks out, we come back and it's a year later. And it's ritual time again. It's ritual. It's the autumn, and it's time for ritual. By the way, well, I'll get into that in a minute. But we see them now. It's coming of age for Marcus, and he's going to get his gun. And now the new hunt begins. But when Lucas arrives, it's as if nothing's wrong. They all brushed it aside. That big oaf that first, pushed that beat up on Marcus and pushed Lucas away from the school. He's the first, and Lucas hugs him, says hello to him. Now he's also with the Italian woman, which is nice to see. She's stuck by him, and he's with Marcus. So obviously this next year passed well for Lucas, and they go in and they're celebrating, and Brune naturally is passing on the gun and remarking on Lucas, and they go out hunting, and he lets Lucas go off on himself, and he's by himself. And then, it happens. The shot rings out, and we don't see who it is. That fired that shot. But that shot says that threat will always be there. There will always be somebody who's not sure, who will be watching him. I'm watching you, buddy, is the attitude. Doesn't matter that he's innocent, but that threat will be there. I mean, he even forgives, and how could he not forgive Clara? When he picks her up to take over the Czech floor. As well as the power of group misthinking. I call this group misthinking. It is Mads Mikkelsen's performance that is central to the story. His performance is really central to this. He never lets us forget for a moment the emotional and physical toll of this systemic ostracization. He is ostracized. He never lets us forget it. We constantly see on his face, how could they do this to me? Why did they do this? I'm innocent, and he objects. He manages to maintain his humanity throughout the dehumanization, because this is a dehumanizing process that he goes through, and he manages to maintain his humanity and eventually his dignity through all of this. Now, the cinematography is also very crucial, how this is filmed, because a lot of it is done in close-up. A lot of it is faces, is facial. We're constantly looking at facial expressions. We look at Clara when she's being questioned. We look at the interrogator doing the questioning. We look at Lucas constantly on his face, and he's got a unique face. His eye, he's got that droopy eye, and, all of these things. But we're constantly looking. It's very intimate, very close up, except for those times outside. And it's interesting. You notice that there is a shot, an intermittent shot of the lake. At the beginning, the lake they swim in, it's autumn. It's still somewhat warm, but the lake freezes over. The lake freezes over. It's like the freezing over of this town. It becomes, an interesting symbol of what's happening in this place. And it also widens out as the distrust of Lucas widens. We see more characters in frame. We see the frame widen out as the process of distrust continues. And the freezing out of any notion of disbelief is what happens when we see that frozen lake. It's interesting. You never hear any music during all of this. You don't need it. You don't need it. I mean, it's a drama now. What it made me first think of, I was telling Marilyn at the beginning, one of the first things I was thinking about as I watched this movie the first time back in 2013, 2012, was something you're all very familiar with, The Crucible. The Crucible by Arthur Miller. That was about a very real witch hunt, a witch hunt. And it's interesting because that play was done in reaction. Arthur Miller wrote that play in reaction. If you all remember what was happening in the 1950s, another witch hunt, both the Army and the Entertainment McCarthy hearings, the House Un-American Activities Committee, rooting out so-called communists and people who lost their careers, people who committed suicide, people who were blacklisted because of that witch hunt. And it took many years to repair that. And it made me immediately think of that. So these things are not uncommon. As a matter of fact, it should resonate with us today, with what's happening in the world today, with what's happening in our world today, in this government, with how far a lie can be stretched to a community, a larger community committing violence. We've seen it here. So I think it's the story itself has so many repercussions and so much resonance. But in the area of sticking with the idea of what the film talks about with child abuse and that subject in this one, it's not an easy subject to deal with. When it happens, who do you believe when it's a child? It's very difficult. It's very difficult, and it requires a very delicate investigation. What Vinterberg does here, what the director does here, is take it from the other side. Take it from the other side. Yes. In other words, rashness can hurt everybody. What that teacher does, what that head teacher does, she's the one who spreads it at the beginning. And that's really, it really required more time, more thinking. And that's what was lacking here. But with that, let me go to the chat, and I have comments in there. Yes, I see another one that's interesting. It was, okay, Clara asks, is her reaction because she feels rejected? Yes, very interesting. I was saying that. Yes, it is. It's because that's a big part of it, is she feels the rejection from Lucas. And, I don't think she's thinking I'm going to get back at him, but she thinks it's a way of expressing her anger, at him. Linda Pava had an interesting comment. Yes, this movie reminded me, and yes, it is the same thing. Lillian Hellman's famous play, which was made into a movie, The Children's Hour. Just as disturbing. Thank you for that, Linda. Okay. So now let me open it up, enter the conversation. Who wants to enter the conversation? Anybody? Raise your hand, the little hand on the, okay, I see Wendy.
Well, yes, I think again, the head teacher really jumped to conclusions. There was no real evidence. It was hearsay, and people
Did we lose her?
and worried that the more that thought just hearsay.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you.
There just wasn't enough evidence, and it was hearsay and it was conjecture with no real evidence.
And the irony of that, the answer to that is the fact that at the very beginning, she trusts Lucas to take care of the little boys. You know, remember she says, Lucas will take you to the bathroom.
Yes.
Lucas will do. I mean, there was an implicit trust there, and she violates that trust right from the get-go because of that, because she jumps to a conclusion, an assumption.
And as a head teacher, she certainly should have known that children fantasize. They make up stories.
Stories, yes.
They make up things that they want to make up.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Well,
okay,
she does actually say that the little girl has an extremely vivid imagination. I mean, I'm not justifying how she handled it. I felt really sorry for her in the beginning because she had to do something and you could see she was struggling. But she actually tells the first investigator that the little girl's got a vivid imagination. Of course, then her own imagination takes over and she runs with it.
Great comment. Yes, that's exactly what happens, because she lets the investigator go places where he shouldn't have gone. I mean, the way he was leading her on just didn't sound right. Just didn't sound right. Thank you, Jackie. Linda.
Well, I was going to say that I actually saw this take place, unfortunately, when I was teaching. It was a private school and the children were from, nice homes, and 3 girls got together and they made some trouble for a group of teachers on the 6th grade level. And the principal stood behind the teachers. And the parents were very sensitive. They really took the side of the school and the principal. And it was a very delicate thing because the parents are paying for this education and they're outstanding students academically, but they decided that they didn't like what the 6th grade teachers were doing as far as testing. I don't remember what exactly it was. And 3 of them got together and went in, and the principal wouldn't hear of it. But that's delicate because they may have been having issues, that were true. So it's handled very well. We were lucky.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you remember years ago, there was a very famous case in California with a daycare center where they were accused of abusing the children. And it turned out it wasn't true. And I think somebody committed suicide as a result of it. I'm not sure. I seem to remember, though, that somebody was affected by it, but it was another case where they found that the children were lying, that it wasn't true.
Shelly, I attended a seminar where a psychologist was speaking about how certain long-standing memories that never took place become real, and you grow with them. And it made me think I had one of those situations where I believed that I had gone to the hospital to see my mom and the new baby brother. And I grew up thinking about that I was really there. And in those days, no one was allowed to go up into the hospitals in the maternity, area. And when I mentioned it, I guess I was just thinking about it, holding it all those years. And I mentioned it to my mother. She said, "No way, you weren't there." But yet in my mind, it was real. So he was trying to bring that out.
Yes.
Even in crime scenes, people see something that they think they saw, and it becomes real.
our mind plays funny tricks, and there is
Mhm.
repressed memory, and there is real memory and invented memory. Jackie, I'm sorry, Jackie.
Oh, I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say the exact opposite of what Linda said. We're from Maryland. Well, no, I mean, no, I'm not disagreeing with you, Linda, but we knew of a situation in Maryland where a high school teacher was accused of something by 3 young girls. Make a really long story short, it was well after a year that not only was he fired and driven out of the profession and moved, but the girls all recanted their story and said something similar, that he had done something that they didn't like at testing or something. So I think one of the things that they brought out in the movie so much is, who do you believe? And you want to believe the children, because this kind of stuff does happen. And yet we really do need to look at everything, because when you stop and you look at that movie, everybody in their own way was culpable, even down to the big brother who wanted to protect his sister. In many ways, he set this in motion. So when you think about it, everybody had a part in it in their own way. And I find that kind of sad, but also very realistic.
Yeah, it is. And that's why, you know, he sets it up at the beginning. We know that Lucas is innocent. And by establishing that, we get to see how all these other characters are operating, and what the misbelief they're operating on. Now, I will tell you, a little surprise that I was saving is there were 3 endings to the movie. There were
Really?
3 endings to the movie, yes. In one of the endings, well, you saw the ending that was voted on. He showed it to several audiences. And the first ending that he originally had was Lucas gets shot and wounded. He gets shot in the arm and he gets wounded. And he lies down on the ground, and it's like he's wondering, okay, what happened? The second version was a little more, was deeper. He gets killed. He gets shot and killed. And Vinterberg, so they tested 3 endings, which is something that goes back days to test endings. And they just decided, they finally came down to the fact of the threat, that it was the strongest, because it leaves an ambiguity in people's minds of, this is not over. These people will keep persecuting him.
Right.
You know, it does never end. It does never end. So it was interesting. I wanted to reveal that to you, that they had 3 endings. Okay, Linda Farber, or
Hi, Shelly. How are you?
oh, hi.
Good to see you again.
You too.
It's Linda and I, and we truly enjoyed the movie, and obviously we enjoyed your discussion today. You raised the question that I was going to raise. It's always interesting, I think, to think about what happens next. And I wanted to ask you what you think happens next in the rest of his life, how he survives in the town or not. But before you get to that, I'd be interested to hear any conversation about who shot at him. Which character do you think is the one who shot at him? And I think this it's not quite clear, and I'd be very interested to hear other people's comments as well as your own.
Okay. Well, first of all, you know, moving on, you do have, you know, it's people are very funny. I mean, we know people are funny. They all seem to forgive him at the outset. You know, he comes, it's a year later, they're all welcoming him back. He's sitting at the table, they're laughing with him. And, you know, it seems like, okay, all is forgiven. But I think in our own minds, in my own mind, it's never going to be that way. That's why he injects that shot and has him miss him in that, maybe miss him intentionally, to do that. But now I will tell you, I mean, you know, he's purposely blurred out by the son. Lucas can't even recognize him. In fact, you know, he leaves us to believe, was the shot really fired? You know, was maybe a shot was fired at a deer and he just reacted this way? I don't know, but I'm just injecting that because there is such an ambiguity. But the fact is, I went back, I ran it in slow motion because I was looking at what the shooter was wearing and to see if you can identify anything the shooter might have been wearing because you can't see his face. And then I went back to the scene where they're having a celebration for Marcus and giving him the gun, because there's a whole pan of the room. The camera pans the room and we see all of these guys. And I'm looking to see if any of them was wearing a sweater that was hanging down that way. And I couldn't tell, but there was one guy sitting there that had a sweater similar to the one the shooter was wearing. And I don't know if it was him. I certainly, if I were a detective, and I would question him, but you don't have that beauty of having a camera out in the woods to see. But the fact is, we're not meant to know. We're just meant to understand. And that's why your question is a valid one about how does he go on, is because we don't know who shot at him. So we know that there may be more than one of them that still believes Lucas could be guilty, and they'll be watching him. They'll be watching him, even though he's been cleared of this crime. Even though he's been cleared of this crime, the supposed crime. There was no crime. There was no abuse. The abuse was on the part of her brother, showing her the pornography. That was the abuse, the real abuse in this. So you know, it's going to be hard, and I think he wants to be accepted. He wants to. As I said, this is his family. This is where he grew up. This is an isolated place, and hopefully they can move on from it. Marilyn?
I always sort of was suspicious of Clara's brother. I thought he would end up doing something. I just looked at him very carefully every time he was on, and just was very suspicious of him. He looked guilty of whatever, I don't know what, but he just looked guilty to me. And my question, I guess, is, do you think he felt any responsibility? Do you think he connected the dots, that it was that pornography that set everything in motion?
It's a valid question. I don't know if he does, because it's like a repressed memory. You know, it's the same thing. They were running up the stairs. It was his friend that showed her the picture, and he pushed his friend on. So does he remember what his friend did? Now, you bring up a very valid point in terms of the investigation. They never asked Clara, you know, did you ever see any pictures? How do you know about this? You know, they never delved deeply into where Clara's thought process came from, how she knew these things.
Yeah.
You know, what did she see? You know, I think it becomes a valid case for us, or for psychologists, to think of, you know, where else have you seen this? Where have you ever seen a picture of this? How do you know about this? And that may have come out. We don't know. We don't know. Or she may have repressed that when the boy showed it to her. So we don't know. We don't know. There's so many ambiguities going on in this. So many ambiguities. Anybody else have any thoughts on the shooter? Who the shooter was? Nope.
Shelly, I don't.
Jackie. Who's
Go
that?
ahead. Go, Jackie.
Sorry, Judy, I was just going to say, we actually thought it was probably the brother too, because I kind of disagreed that at the very end all was forgiven, although they had no reason to be forgiving him. He should be the one forgiving them. But when, just what Marilyn said, when they pan that table and you look, there was at least one guy who had a very hostile look on his face, and the brother is laughing. And as soon as he sees Lucas, he starts to cloud over. So I really didn't think all was forgiven. And I kind of thought the shooter was probably Lucas too. I mean, the brother too.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, people do have that sense, but see, that's in a way gives us an idea again of if somebody says, it was the brother, somebody else says, you know what, the brother could have done it. And somebody else says the brother could have done it. Now we got somebody else to go after, and he may be innocent. But that's just the idea of what happens when groupthink takes over. It's interesting. It's interesting. We'll never know who it was, but you know, yes, I think the brother does have a certain amount of guilt to bear, and maybe he does remember, maybe he doesn't. But there is. You're right. I agree with you, Jackie, that there is going to be that underlying feeling that they're not all going to forgive him, even though there's nothing to forgive him for. That will happen. That will happen. Okay, who's next? Barbara.
I felt that we were meant not to know
Yeah.
who shot her. Very much we weren't to figure out who it was. There's always somebody that's going to leap out of the background and was quiet and never changed their mind about what had happened.
Yes, I agree.
It
And he
reminded
purposely,
me as I chatted of I remember the daycare case and also the Woody Allen case.
yes,
When he was, and they had all sorts of psychiatrists and expert witnesses, and testimony went on forever, and it was never resolved. We just left the country.
yeah, yeah. It's but you're right. I don't think we are meant to know exactly who it was. There will always be somebody. There will always be somebody. And he purposely doesn't shoot to kill or shoot to even hit him. He purposely misses him because he's got a sight, and he was just standing. Yeah, it's a warning. We're going to be watching you. We're going to be watching you, or I'm watching you anyway. So yes.
Shelly,
Thank
there's
you,
more
Barbara.
chat. There's more stuff in the chat.
In the chat, okay, yes, I see two more. Reaction because she feels that we went through. Here we go. Always questioned it. Jackie, yes, and Claire actually. Okay, we got that. Being watched, judged. Bonnie, I think the threat of being watched, judged is inherent in living with others and being human. Yes, the movie is a great portrayal of this. How far do we go in our behavior in compromising our own morals? Great question. Great question. One which each has to ask themselves. How far do you believe? What do you believe? How far will you go? It brought to mind the Woody Allen case. Yes, Barbara, thank you. They were kids, boys, not thinking. Yeah, the fact that they would be guilty, Jackie, the brother. Yeah, that's how I felt. Is I think that it wouldn't even enter their mind at this point. We also don't know anything about what happened between Theo's realization, the latest scene. Well, I think that Theo, Theo now believes him at that point. I mean, brings him the food. He hears Clara's confession. The question is, did he tell? Do they know that he's not guilty because Theo came out and said, Clara told me that it was all a lie? That it was all a lie. I mean, we have to believe that happened. Otherwise, where does the innocence come from? So the question is, how does Theo deal with it? How does Theo deal? And it's a great question. How does Theo deal with my daughter lied and all of this was set in motion? And I was the first one that pinned him against the wall, that told him, I'll kill you. I'll kill you. If you remember, Theo threatens to kill him at the beginning. So how does Theo deal with all of this? What is all this ancillary damage that's done by a child's presumed lie? What happens? And it's an interesting thought, and it's a thought process. And I don't know how, but we understand that Theo and Lucas are friends. They were best friends to begin with. They grew up together and shared too much, I think, to let it go. And Lucas had to be the forgiving one, certainly.
Shelly, am I the
Yeah.
only one who thought that it could possibly be Theo, her father, that abused her? Because
No, I
when
don't
he
think
ca-
anybody abused her. I don't think anybody abused her.
But when the father came in and she said, oh, I thought you were Lucas. I thought maybe he was the one that came in to her at night and
No, I think that's, you bring up, first of all, I asked you, one can jump to wondering when she's going through this process, especially with the parents arguing. And he's this macho guy, he had the heads hanging, we see the heads hanging in the room. his trophies. Is he capable of this? And I sort of ruled it out. I didn't think he really abused her. I don't think she suffered abuse. I think she was, although, she had her little problems. She had her little problems. She would get lost. Remember, she said she was constantly looking at the cracks to avoid the cracks, and she would get lost. She wouldn't remember where she was. She wouldn't remember how to get home. All of these things. So she would forget things, but this she remembers. Very strange, very strange. I think it was the rejection of Lucas that caused her to be that way at that point. Jackie, I see your hand up again.
One of the things we thought about is there wasn't a answer as to how he got off. Or originally when they were having the conversation, the Godfather said that it's either going to be one of two things the next day at the court. The judge is going to say there's not enough evidence and it goes away, or go to trial. So you wonder, was it just there wasn't enough evidence, so it just died down? Did that not really give a clear end to it also? Or would it have been better if there was a trial and proved innocent, as opposed to it just was still a gray area?
Well, we didn't get to that trial. I don't think we got to that trial because what we have to believe, or hopefully believe, is that Theo came up and said, my daughter told me she made this up, that she was sorry and she made this up. And hopefully that's what did it, because I don't know if even if the judge said there's not enough evidence, if everybody still would have believed it. But there was also the lie of the kids, the ones that said that they went down to his basement. He took them down to his basement. Which certainly set something else up, to say what's going on here, who's telling the truth. But I think Theo probably fessed up and admitted that his daughter told a lie. His daughter, imagined all of this for whatever reason. And he said, remember what he says to her when she says that. He says, there's evil in this world. There's evil in this world, and we have to watch out for it. We have to be careful, and we don't know where it's going to come from. And I think he felt guilty with that statement and knew that he had to go forward and protect his friend. So I think we have to, figure that's what happened, because it is a year later. And a year is a long time for him to have to stay in that town and be cleared, and everybody's, forgiving. Everybody's forgiving, or seemingly forgiving. So I think that's where we are with it. Especially in the structure of the film. He purposely does those, what I call ellipses, skipping a year, for us to think about that, to throw these questions in, for us to have this discussion. It's because we all will look and say, who do you believe? Now when you're faced with this, where do you go with this? We see so many cases of this, even with forget about child abuse, with rape, with women with rape, coming forward. The onus can't be on them. They're the victims. So we have to step back and we have to say, okay, what's really going on here, and investigate the case, not jump to a conclusion. And that was really what set the ball rolling in the film, was jumping to conclusions, assuming he was guilty without really listening, without really delving, without investigating. That really was the damage. Had they investigated carefully and done this, you wouldn't have committed the damage that happened. And I think that's what he's trying to tell us. Anybody else?
There are two more questions. Rhonda wanted to know about the dog. Rhonda wanted to know who you think shot the dog.
Who killed the dog? Yeah.
You can sort out the dog.
Barbara has a comment on that. Get Barbara.
I was scared to death when the dog was locked in the house. that the dog was going to die in the house. And I'm through all this anxiety and nobody says anything about the dog for so long. And you're watching the movie and saying, well, the dog's in the house and he can't get in.
Yeah.
And then to have that happen, I was like, oh my gosh. But
Yeah.
I know it's
Yeah.
just nicely done.
Yeah,
Shelley?
it was a brutal act. Yeah.
Oh, it was horrible.
Shelley,
Yeah, Maurice.
I was curious in preparation for the movie critique. How many times did you see this film recently?
If I tell you, I will have to commit a crime. No, I've probably seen this film no less than maybe 9 or 10 times. At least 9 or 10 times. I mean, I
Okay.
presented it over the years to various groups, and I will tell you, the reactions have been very similar. It's interesting. I love it when there is a film like this and listening to people and how they look at the film and structure their own feelings about the film. But the feelings have been generally the same. But it's important. I do look at all these little details in the film. I mean, the eye twitch scene and relating it back, the little details of how Clara behaves during the film, during the story. Remember, she goes back even after she comes to the house and she wants to see Fanny. And he tells her it's not a good idea to be here. It's not a good idea to be here. This is not the way a child pervert reacts. That's why we know he's innocent. We know he's even, continuing to be innocent. And he's trying to deal with it delicately. He's trying to figure it out. When she comes to the house and she wants to see Fanny. Whoever, again, like shooting at him, who killed the dog. It was a terrible thing that it was done, but everybody knew Fanny because she followed him to the supermarket. We see the dog with him. Remember when he goes shopping at the beginning, he's with Fanny. When Clara sees the dog, and we see the dog. So I think that visually, without saying a word, we know that Fanny's a popular dog. Fanny was a popular dog. And that's one of the things, a screenwriter puts in. How do I make it, I don't want to hit it people over the head, but obviously they killed his best friend. That's what you're attacking when you kill the dog. You're killing the man's best friend. And you're next. Is the warning. Marilyn?
Shelley, there was an interesting comment that Michelle Cowan put into the chat about Theo made a point of knowing when Lucas was lying, and therefore maybe that's why he inevitably came to the defense of Lucas, because he would know that he's not lying. I thought that was a good
Right.
point.
Yeah, that was the Chekhov. That's why I call it the Chekhov gun. Is at the beginning, he made a big thing out of, I know when you're lying, your eye starts to twitch. Now, this is a guy that knew him all his life. So obviously he picked up on that early in their lives. And it's obviously a trait he always had. So Lucas was an honest guy. He couldn't lie because he would get caught. So now when he approaches him in the church and says that, look at my eye. What do you see? His eye wasn't twitching. He was dead on. Thank you, Marilyn.
Okay.
Okay.
Michelle, not from me.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, anybody else? Well, terrific. Great discussion. Now I would like to tell you about next month's film. This is an absolutely beautiful film. It is both a love story, a coming of age story, and a story about a particular culture, in this case, Vietnam, prior to the Vietnam War. It's a film from 1994 entitled The Scent of Green Papaya. The Scent of Green Papaya. It's already got a poetic name. It's one of the most visually stunning films I remember seeing in a long time. It's an atmospheric tale of pre-war Vietnam, so we really get a look into the culture. And it's told through the eyes of a young servant girl who begins working in a family at a very young age. I think she's like 11, from 10 years old, following her up through womanhood. And her observations of nature and the people she serves create it's a very vibrant and revealing reflection of this culture, influenced by both Eastern and Western tradition. One of the interesting things about the film, and I invite you to look at, is how Western culture leaked into the Vietnamese culture and how one plays with the other. It's very beautifully done, but it deals with so many subjects, and it is, again, another resonant love story. I mean, how it turns into, goes from a coming of age story and turns into a love story is very beautiful. I'll tell you more about this director and the other films he's made, which are all beautiful films, very poetic, but this one especially, and earned its nomination for an Academy Award, but won so many other awards. So I'll look forward to seeing you next month.
That's
for
February 9th.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
February 9th.
February
Thank
9th
you.
for the Scent of Green Papaya. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Terrific,
Shelley. Good night.
terrific.
Thanks, Shelley.
Loved
Good night,
it.
everybody.